Lena Duham, I'm going to call you out on your bluff and say that you're using birth control to regulate your periods, and you're a vapid mind that hasn't been asking your doctor too many questions about your endometriosis. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but Lena Duham, I kind of know a little bit about you. You're this kid that's like 10 years my junior, and you're like this silly little child that everybody should laugh at and nobody should pay attention to. I've heard stuff about you before, and it's like you're just a silly child to me, and nobody should listen to anything you say. Everybody should just laugh at you when you speak. Women don't need birth control to regulate their periods. Women don't need birth control to regulate their moods. Women don't need birth control to prevent cancer. Women don't need birth control to keep their skin clear. Women just need birth control to prevent unwanted pregnancy. And women today really have to be critical of birth control because the gynecologist today is saying women don't need periods. And the U.S. Navy gynecologist is saying that women today don't need periods. So women today really have to be critical of birth control just because the gynecologist today is saying that women don't need periods. And I had the opportunity to try birth control when I enlisted in U.S. Navy. And I enlisted in U.S. Navy. I did 3 weeks of boot camp, and I failed. And when I enlisted in U.S. Navy, and when I was doing boot camp, I met the gynecologist, and she asked me if I wanted to try birth control. Specifically, she asked me if I wanted to try the IUD, and I said no. I don't want to use birth control. It's ridiculous for women to use birth control at U.S. Navy boot camp. The men and women are very well segregated, and the only time you see the men is at basic training, and basic training is just hardcore work. And people, men and women, don't really have a lot of time to talk to each other and socialize. You're just working, to the bone. And when you're done basic training, the men and women go off their separate quarters, and they don't really see each other again until the next day at basic training. Women don't need birth control to regulate their periods at boot camp. Women in the military should know how to use biblical methods to regulate their periods, because when they're doing combat duty, they're not, going to have birth control available. So women in the military should know how to use biblical methods to regulate their periods. Women in boot camp should not be using birth control to regulate their periods. And when I failed boot camp, I went to the gynecologist to ask, why was my periods going irregular, and why didn't I not have my period that month? And the gynecologist basically told me it was that environment that was causing me to, not have my period that month. I mean, I'm pretty regular. I don't have a lot of problems with my period, and that was the first time, my period just didn't come. So I asked the U.S. Navy gynecologist a lot of questions, and she said that it was the environment that was, causing me to go irregular, and I'll get my period back, when I become a civilian. And I've gotten my period back, but it's gone lighter. And I hope the gynecologist, didn't put the IUD, in my crotch. I hope the IUD hasn't been there for the last 8 years, because I said I didn't want birth control, and I can only be the kind of naive, kid that hoped that, she took my request seriously. I didn't want birth control at U.S. Navy boot camp. I don't need birth control at U.S. Navy boot camp. And any woman at U.S. Navy who needs birth control to regulate their period, or any women at U.S. Navy who needs birth control to deal with their endometriosis, doesn't belong in boot camp. I mean, any woman who needs birth control to regulate their period for any reason doesn't belong in boot camp. Um, I woke up a little tired, but Lena Duham, I have to call you out on your bluff and say that you're just using birth control to regulate your periods, and yet you're not really asking too many questions, about your period. And women do have to be critical about birth control today, just because the gynecologists today are saying that women don't need periods.